Hello and welcome back to Lois and Morgana Davidson Art. Today I'd like to share with you this wonderful painting of a nesting stork that Morgana has painted. She uses salt to create some really beautiful effects, so I really hope you enjoy watching her create her magic here.
Hello everybody and welcome to Lois and Morgana Davidson Art. It's Morgana here, and today I'll be painting this dramatic scene of a stork at sundown coming in to rest on his nest. The first step in this painting is to sketch out your stork onto your paper of choice. I'm using Stratford brand cold press watercolour paper size A4, and this is the reference photograph that I used today, which you can find online on the image sharing website pixabay.com. The next step is to protect your outline using your chosen brand of masking fluid or drawing gum. I use Pebeo brand drawing gum for this, and once it's dry, I'm just going to put a wash of clean water over the whole piece of paper here with my 2-inch brush, just to get it nice and wet and ready for the first wash. Now, using the flat brush, I'm going to first introduce some lovely bright raw sienna for a little golden sunset glow, followed up by some light indigo. I'm using my large mop brush for this, just to get a little bit more control over the paint and over the movement of the paint across the paper, of course painting wet and wet here. Next I add in a little bit of alizarin crimson hue, which is a lovely bright colour but is also an excellent mixer and is really wonderful sort of subtle dusty or sunset tones when mixed with the right colours. You can see I'm not really using it on its own here, I'm blending it on the paper with the indigo and with the raw sienna. So at this point I was taking quite an experimental approach to the painting, seeing what sort of patterns and marks I could create in order to set up a backdrop for this lovely bird. Seeing as the reference photograph that I'm using is literally just the bird on its own with no backdrop, I feel like that gives us a wonderful sort of level of creative freedom to place it against whatever landscape or whatever background that we like. So here I just wanted to start building up texture and just get enough interesting colour and detail into this background wash that it could certainly be turned into a loose landscape background of some description. You can see I'm coming in now with my sword liner brush and a bit of extra raw sienna to just add a little bit of extra detail, a few lines here and there, before switching back to the mop brush and dabbing in a few more dark colours. And at this point it really is a simple matter of just building up your colour and texture in the initial wash, seeing where the brush strokes take you. Some of you may not like this colour combination, in which case please do feel free to use your own favourite colours and favourite techniques. I was really enjoying the sort of slightly circular pattern of almost petals that the brush was creating here, so I decided to enhance that with a little bit more indigo. As you can see, the paper is still wet, so my brush strokes are sort of softening down, losing their hard edges, and we're getting those lovely lost and found edges here with the wet and wet wash, which is exactly what I was hoping for. You can see I'm just using the very tips of the mop brush to introduce a bit more texture. But before I go overboard and end up overworking it too much, I decided to pop on a little bit of salt. That's one of my favourite techniques to use for watercolour. I'm only using a very small sprinkling, as you can see here, just dotting a little bit into the sky area, this pale patch in the top right corner, and then down below. You can see here I'm just dabbing some of the paint out of the stork area where it's pooling on top of the drawing gum or masking fluid. You just want to do this to enable a cleaner lift off of the drawing gum once everything is all dry. So this is how that first wash dried, and I'm really pleased with how it's come out. You can see a little scattering of delicate salt blooms across the painting. And after leaving it for a day to consider, I decided to build up this darker area here, which already has this pleasing sort of almost circular pattern, into a nest for our bird to be coming in to land on. And to do this, I used, as you can see here, my small liner brush, my small sword liner, and I'm just slowly going around in vague circles, building up lines of colour in quite a textural manner, just trying to get the impression of a built-up layer of sort of sticks and twigs and the way a nest would naturally be created, so attempting to mimic that with my brush strokes. It did take a little while. I won't include the full process here because it did take rather a long time in terms of building colour and layering and waiting for the colours to dry. I will say that I used indigo for the dark strokes that you can see here, intermingled with a bit of white gouache as well, which has the lovely opacity going over the indigo, standing up to that dark colour, and also helping to build a little bit more of a sense of a structure and a solidity in this area of the painting. And you can see here how the white is standing up over the indigo, and I'm using these really loose, quick little brush strokes, trying not to take too much time or be too careful over it, but just focusing on building up these overall shapes and the lights and the darks. After several sessions of this sort of layering process, I was happy with the general shape of the nest. It looked large enough to contain such a magnificent bird with such an impressive wingspan, so I then decided to begin building up some fine branches around this left-hand area just to settle that nest into the background of the landscape a little bit more. And again, I'm using indigo for this because it's a lovely dark, strong colour, and I really enjoy when my paintings have that sort of colour harmony. Of course, indigo isn't perhaps the natural colour of sort of trees and branches. However, I think it worked for the painting, but if you are not a fan, you are very welcome to use perhaps, I think, a raw umber would look really nice here as well and be a more naturalistic colour for building up plant detail. And once I was happy with my branches on this side, I built up a little extra colour and depth using my textural brush, as you can see here. Repeating a similar process on the other side, literally just layering up some fine lines and then building up texture like this, using a very simple sort of dabbing motion, and then following up with a few sort of fine lines with my sword liner again to just build up the sense of some nice sort of tall twiggy branches and bits of foliage. At this point in the painting, it's really a matter of the artist's discretion as to how far you want to go with this sort of level of detail. You can go absolutely mad and build up loads of branches and loads of extra sort of bits and bobs and leaves and bushes and foliage, but I decided that sometimes perhaps less is more, particularly on this right hand side. And as you can see on the right side with the nest, I've really built up the darks quite considerably in that bottom left corner particularly, so you can see that I'm actually lightening up the right hand side once I've put in those dark branches, just by using a little more white gouache to add some highlights down the side of the branches that I've drawn. And once that was fully dried, and really do make sure that everything is fully dry before you start this, it is time to remove all your masking fluid. And you can see here we've got this lovely clean shape. However, do bear in mind that your masking fluid will often remove a lot of the pencil detail from your drawing, so you may need to go back in like I have here and just redraw a couple of the key details. You can see I've just redrawn the head and the neck just to give myself a little bit of guidance when it comes to painting. So now I'm really happy with how our background looks, this lovely landscape. So my focus is on painting the stork itself. So for the beak I used a mixture of alizarin crimson with some burnt sienna to create this nice reddish colour. And as for the rest of the bird, I'm going to paint it mostly wet in wet, and a large part of this bird is of course white, which brings us some challenges as artists, but also makes it a little bit easier when it comes to watercolour, because of course we have the white of the paper there already. So it's just a matter of carefully enhancing what's already there. You can see here, or at least I hope you can see, I hope the camera has picked it up. I'm using very, very diluted colours, wet and wet, to sort of create some shading and some shadows in the white area of the bird's body. So here, this is a bit of Payne's grey now, and I'm using a small round brush, size 4, which for me is a perfect size to add in this kind of detail without it having to take too long, which sometimes if you're using a very fine brush you can find that covering large areas of paper can really be a chore. So always do make sure that you have the right sort of size brushes for the job. Just adding a bit of extra darker shadow here around the tail where it fans out, and around the bird's legs where the shadow would naturally be cast. Also in the body of the bird earlier, I used a touch of raw sienna again, just to help to translate that white of the paper into a shape and the sort of tone and shadow of the bird's body itself. This helps to create an idea of three-dimensionality and the actual shape of the creature, rather than it just being a flat two-dimensional sort of plane of something white, essentially. At this point I'm happy with the sort of shadows that I've built up on the sort of inner side of the wing, the tail and the bird's body, so it's time to add a bit more of darker colour. So beginning again with Payne's grey, I'm just building up some shading on these wingtips first, just because I want to give myself sort of a guide as to where to put the very dark paint. Without putting the very dark paint down first and risking getting it wrong and messing up quite a long period of work that I've put into this painting so far. So here is the Payne's grey going in to start with, basically providing the guidelines that I can now follow with the much stronger Payne's grey. And of course you don't have to use Payne's grey for this. You could certainly use any kind of dark grey or black watercolour paint. The Stork colouring is of course black here on the wingtip, sort of black and white bird. I tend to shy away from using an actual sort of a lamp black or something like that for these birds, because so rarely are they actually very, very dark black with no shadows and no reflections. I think Payne's grey is a nice happy medium in between blackest black and palest grey. You can dilute it to be really lovely and pale, or you can use it like I am here, really quite intensely to give a lovely contrast. And you can see that for this section of the painting I switched back to using a fine detail brush, just for that little bit extra amount of control that it gives me with these dark colours to begin with. You can see how useful it is here, just making sure that there's that clean, smooth line along the top of the feather and the wing, where the pin feathers, as you can see, are sort of folded over here, where the bird is coming into land. It's slightly an awkward shape, rather than the more traditional wing shape, which is the one on the right. So I wanted to do this one first, mostly because I wanted to make sure that I got it right. Now with areas like this that are perhaps a little bit awkward and could potentially go wrong, it is always worth just taking your time, perhaps using a smaller brush than you normally would, just to get that detail right before you then move on to the rest of the painting. You can see now that I switch back to my size 4 brush to fill in the rest of the dark colour on the wing here, because now I'm a bit more confident with it, now that I've got this awkward bit up here done. I think it is worth taking the time sometimes with areas like this in a painting where you've got an awkward angle or a bit of foreshortening, like we've got here. You've got a shadow or a folded wing or something that could potentially look a little awkward if painted wrong. Right here you can see I'm feeling a bit more confident now, and so bringing in some more Payne's grey and just pulling the darts into the shapes of the feathers that are already sort of there for us, using the masking fluid of course, and just bringing those details up and into the wing, and just getting a really nice sort of transition between this dark colour and of course the very, very pale paint that we've already got here, this sort of white area of the wing that has just been really, really basically shaded with some very, very, very light Payne's grey. And now here, this is just the finishing touch to these dark areas along the wing. I'm using paint almost straight from the tube, really nice and dark, to just give an extra depth to these wing edges and to follow the pattern up and along the wing. And then it is a relatively simple matter to simply repeat the process on the other wing. And now all that I need to still do here is basically put in some of the final details. So here I'm just putting in the colour on the legs, and I'm using the same colour that I mixed up to paint the bird's beak earlier, which is alizarin crimson mixed with a bit of the burnt sienna. And because of the shading detail that I already put around the tail area earlier, this has created the outline of the legs for us using a bit of negative painting there, which is then very easy to just fill in with a small enough brush. And now after painting the leg in full, you can see I'm just coming back in with the same colour but slightly darker, slightly stronger I should say, mix of paint, less water, and just adding a few little touches of detail along the leg just to make it not look like a one big sort of long block of colour, so there's a little bit of texture in there. And I'm just going to do that with the other leg as well once this one has dried, before moving on to some of the smaller details, which I'm just going to show you here in this close-up. So I'm using Payne's grey and my fine detail brush. Of course you could use black here to just put in little details like the stork's eye, a thin line down the edge of the beak, and a little nostril along the top here. If this is the kind of thing that you struggle to do with a brush, which I certainly did struggle with for a very long time, so I always used to do these fine details in fine liner pen after I'd done all the sort of main parts of the painting. I would come in with my, very fine 0.2 fine liner and just add in these little details with the pen that I felt a lot more confident and in control of. So that's certainly something you can do here if you want to add those little details, but if you're slightly worried about having a fine enough brush or about your ability to control that brush at the moment. And now, talking of finishing touches, you can see I'm adding a little bit more colour here. This is again really, really diluted down Payne's grey just to build up the shadow, just because I felt like it needed a little bit of extra shading around the legs and the underside of the body. You can always go back in and build up a little extra shadow and a little bit of extra shading after the main bulk of the bird is done. Always trust your instincts as to whether or not something looks right or not. And now finally, just to enhance those lovely little salt sprinkles we've already got, I'm putting in a tiny spattering of opaque white gouache just around the bird, just to give a little extra delicacy, a little extra detail. And there we are, this is the finished painting. and I'm absolutely thrilled with how this one turned out. I love paintings that always come as a little bit of a surprise, and I didn't go into this one envisaging that the dark sort of mess that I made during the wash stage would become a nest for this majestic bird, but I'm so pleased that it turned out this way. I think it always pays to be slightly flexible when you come to painting watercolour, and to see the potential that sometimes arises in the marks that you're making almost by accident, as it were. But thank you everybody so much for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed this video. I certainly enjoyed painting it for you. Any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments area below the video. But that's all from me today, so I wish you a wonderful rest of the day, everybody, and very happy painting.